It was still dark on the morning of January 19th, 2002, in the quiet town of Santomera, Spain. Inside a small house, two little boys were asleep in bed next to their mother. Everything seemed calm until something terrible happened. By sunrise, police were at the house, and the peaceful neighborhood was in shock. No one could believe what had taken place overnight. What really happened inside that home? And how did a mother end up at the center of such a heartbreaking story? Francisca Gonzalez was born in 1966 in the small town of Santomera, located in Murcia, Spain. She grew up in a deeply religious community, in a home with her parents, two sisters, and a brother. Life in Santomera revolved around Catholic traditions and conservative values, but behind the pious exterior, not everything was serene in her household. Reports suggest that her father struggled with alcoholism, which likely cast a shadow over her formative years. Francisca completed her basic education and became known for her attention to appearance from a young age. This focus on her image intensified after a comment from her brother about her weight. According to her mother, Francisca had several romantic relationships during her teenage years, including one with a wealthy foreigner, though she was never drawn to material comfort alone. At 18, she met José Ruiz Nicolá, known as Pepe, and the two quickly became romantically involved. After nearly 2 years of dating, Francisca became pregnant, and the couple entered a civil marriage in 1987. Their first child, José Carlos, was born soon after. Francisca would later recount that Pepe had a history of soliciting sex workers for group encounters, a lifestyle he attempted to leave behind during their courtship. However, after their marriage, those tendencies resurfaced. He introduced her to a world of partner swapping and outings to clubs catering to similar interests. In 1996, 9 years after their civil ceremony, the couple solemnized their marriage in the Catholic Church with a large celebration. That same year, their second son, Francisco Miguel, was born, followed by a third, Adrián, in 1998. While their family expanded, so too did the turmoil in their home. Pepe's job as an international truck driver meant he was away for long periods, leaving Francisca to manage the household alone. His prolonged absences stirred deep jealousy in Francisca. She began tracking his movements, sometimes even in disguise and by taxi. Their arguments escalated, both over the phone and in person, sometimes erupting into physical altercations. Francisca later described enduring psychological abuse. Feeling abandoned, she turned to compulsive shopping and invested heavily in clothes and lingerie, hoping to reignite her husband's interest despite her deep resentment. Her emotional instability worsened. Francisca developed a dependence on alcohol and drugs, substances that, according to later revelations, were frequently present in the household. Between 1990 and 1999, Medical records documented her struggles with anxiety, insomnia, and anemia. Amid her breakdown, her children bore the brunt. Francisca became harsh and physically violent, far from the nurturing figure they needed. By 2002, the oldest son, Jose Carlos, then 14, had taken on the role of caregiver for his younger brothers. He was responsible not just for supervising them, but also for their basic needs, like meals and hygiene. The home environment had become deeply unstable, yet no one could foresee the horror about to unfold. Francisca, convinced her husband was still unfaithful, followed him to a business park where she believed she saw him with another woman. This incident, some say, was the final fracture in an already crumbling marriage. When Pepe announced he was leaving for a trucking job in France, Francisca issued a chilling threat. She would hurt him more than he had ever hurt her. He left, but their fights continued by phone. Back home, she sank deeper into substance abuse. On Friday, January 18th, 2002, she stayed in bed with flu symptoms, but later took her children to the park. That night, as Jose Carlos watched over the household, the younger boys slept in the marital bed with their mother. In the early hours of Saturday, January 19th, the silence of the house was shattered by the screams of the younger children. Jose Carlos awoke but stayed in bed, assuming it was another episode of maternal punishment. Violence had become such a norm that he didn't suspect the danger. The morning brought three differing accounts of what occurred. One version states that Jose Carlos tried to wake his brothers and found them lifeless. Terrified, he ran to alert nearby relatives while Francisca called the police. Another narrative claims he awoke to unusual sounds and discovered the gruesome scene himself. A third suggests that Francisca woke him, alleging a robbery had occurred and urging him to seek help. When authorities arrived, the sight was horrifying. The two boys lay in the master bed, bearing visible signs of violence. Bruises and pressure marks indicated asphyxiation. Investigators immediately focused on understanding what happened during the night and who was responsible. Francisca initially said that a group of Ecuadorian men had broken into the home through the balcony window with intent to rob. She claimed to have attempted to defend her children using a can of pepper spray, which the intruders wrestled from her before rendering her unconscious. This, she said, explained her inability to protect her sons. One of the officers later shared in an interview that although Francisca appeared agitated, she did not seem overtaken by grief. More concerning, however, was her attempt to direct the officer's attention toward very specific clues, raising suspicions that she was trying to steer the investigation. While Francisca and her surviving son received psychological support from Murcia's social services, the police began collecting statements from extended family and neighbors. As soon as Francisca was physically stable, she was taken to the Forensic Institute for a medical evaluation. The examination aimed to assess the alleged effects of the paralyzing gas she claimed had been used on her, as well as the scratches found on her wrists and face. Initial reports revealed that during her emergency call, Francisca repeatedly cried that her children had been taken from her. Her husband, who was abroad at the time, immediately began his journey back to Santomera upon hearing the devastating news. In her earliest testimony, Francisca alleged that intruders had not only killed her children, but also stolen several pieces of jewelry. She claimed that in the days leading up to the attack, unfamiliar foreign men had been loitering near the house. She even said she had changed the door lock days earlier after finding it tampered with. Among the theories she offered to detectives was that the attack could have been a message, an act of retribution tied to her husband's alleged involvement in drug trafficking. But her version of events soon began to unravel. As investigators pressed her for details, contradictions emerged. At first, she said two men broke in. Later, it was just one. She claimed the scratches on her face came from a struggle, yet she also insisted the assailants wore gloves. The inconsistencies multiplied. After 12 hours of questioning, suspicion had shifted squarely onto Francisca herself. Statements from her son Jose Carlos and from neighbors further weakened her claims. They described her as emotionally unstable and prone to violent outbursts. Then came the autopsy results. The time of death for the two boys was placed between 2 and 3 a.m., hours before the time Francisca had claimed the supposed burglary took place. Further forensic analysis added more damning evidence. Tissue found beneath the children's fingernails did not match either of the boys. It was later confirmed through DNA to belong to their mother. Additionally, Francisca's own medical exam contradicted her story. She showed none of the physical symptoms typically associated with exposure to a paralyzing agent: no throat or eye irritation, no respiratory issues. And then, another blow to her narrative. During a search of the house, officers discovered the supposedly stolen jewelry hidden in couch cushions. A blonde wig and 9,000 euros in cash were also recovered from the property, suggesting premeditation. Investigators recalled an important detail shared by Jose Carlos during the initial interviews. On the evening before the tragedy, Francisca had asked him to go out and buy batteries for his Walkman. Seemingly innocent, this request was later interpreted as an attempt to ensure the teenager's room was filled with music, blocking out any sounds from the crime she was about to commit. It also surfaced that Francisca had requested her housekeeper come by the next morning, a move interpreted by police as a calculated effort to clean up potential evidence. In her written declaration, Francisca claimed that during the early morning hours, she had been awake exchanging text messages with her husband. Around sunrise, she said, she heard glass shattering. Opening her bedroom door, she claimed to have encountered a gloved man whom she attempted to fend off with a canister of spray and a knife hidden beneath the bed. The man, according to her, overpowered her and sprayed her unconscious. When she came to, her children were dead and some jewelry was missing. But investigators quickly determined her story didn't hold up. They reconstructed the timeline and concluded it was physically impossible for everything she described to have occurred in the brief time frame she outlined. Despite growing suspicion, authorities did not arrest her immediately. They allowed her to attend the funeral, where she appeared heartbroken and composed, standing beside her estranged husband, both consumed by grief. Only one day after the funeral, the police arrested Francisca. The woman who had just wept for her children was now being taken into custody as the prime suspect in their deaths. Pepe and Jose Carlos watched in disbelief as she was placed into the back of a police vehicle, just 48 hours after burying the boys. It didn't take long for the facade to collapse. Under pressure during a formal interrogation, Francisca broke down and admitted to killing her two youngest sons. But even as she confessed, she sought to deflect full responsibility. Her defense hinged on the claim that a potent mix of alcohol, cocaine, and tranquilizers had clouded her judgment in the hours leading up to the tragedy. She described waking after 7 a.m., dazed from the substances, and discovering her children lifeless beside her. According to her statement, she wandered through the house to confirm whether an intruder had entered. Finding no signs of forced entry, she concluded, horrifyingly, that she must have been the one responsible. Still, moments after this admission, she contradicted herself again, asserting that she had genuinely believed at first that strangers had broken into the house, a belief she blamed on the hallucinatory effects of the drugs. The timeline reconstructed by authorities was chilling. Around 2 a.m., Francisca is believed to have entered her bedroom. She first attacked her middle child, using a mobile phone charger cable to strangle him. The boy fought back, leaving scratch marks on her body. Despite his resistance, she overpowered him. Then she turned to the youngest and repeated the act. As the legal process advanced, her defense team proposed that she be transferred to a psychiatric facility. The court approved the request. Evaluated by forensic psychiatrists, Francisca was described as cold, manipulative, immature, and egocentric. She craved attention, they wrote, and demonstrated emotional instability, controlling behavior and aggressive tendencies. They noted paranoid and narcissistic personality traits and remarked on her lack of interest in maintaining social or familial harmony. Still, Francisca continued to frame herself as a victim. In her first statement to the judge, she blamed her actions on years of psychological torment. She described 2001 as a year of unrelenting emotional deterioration, citing humiliation, threats, and verbal abuse from her husband. She claimed that Pepe had pushed her into partner swapping clubs and maintained a year-long affair that ended just before the murders. Her substance abuse, she argued, was rooted in trauma. She also asserted that their family had been in danger due to Pepe's alleged involvement in drug trafficking. She recounted an incident where a stranger pointed a gun at Pepe's head, claiming this terrifying encounter had prompted her to prepare for a possible escape. It was, she explained, the reason she purchased a blonde wig and hid €9,000 in cash, the same items later seized by police. These were not tools for a crime, she insisted, but a contingency plan. Francisca denied any premeditation. She claimed that if she had intended to flee, she would have done so. The idea of staging a robbery only came to her when she awoke to find her sons dead, she said, not before. She insisted she never meant to harm her kids, and reiterated that she had no memory of her actions that night due to a heavy mix of 5 grams of cocaine, sleeping pills, and several glasses of whiskey. She denied that the murders were intended to hurt her husband, saying there had been far more effective opportunities to do so if that had been her goal. As for Pepe, he maintained a measured position. He acknowledged the infidelity, admitted he had spent too much time away from home because of work, and blamed himself for not noticing the signs earlier. He recounted how Francisca began smelling of alcohol and making small weekly withdrawals from their shared account. Despite their estrangement, He claimed she had loved him obsessively and insisted she would never have harmed the children had she not been under the influence of drugs and alcohol. Pepe even revealed he had once considered seeking psychiatric help for her, a decision he now regretted not following through on. In the face of unimaginable loss, guilt, and confusion, he found himself trying to make sense of the woman he thought he knew and the mother who had become a killer. Then, another layer of complexity emerged. According to judicial sources cited by local newspapers, Francisca was allegedly involved in a romantic relationship with a businessman from Murcia. This man, whose identity was never revealed, was described as someone she was deeply in love with, a claim that stood in stark contrast to her obsessive surveillance of her husband. Investigators found multiple phone calls between Francisco and this mystery man in the days leading up to the killings, including one placed just minutes after the murders. While the content of the call was never made public, some sources speculated that the extramarital affair may have fueled a desire for revenge. Francisca denied everything. She claimed the alleged lover never existed and accused her husband of fabricating stories to portray her as unstable and discredit her accusations of abuse. Amid swirling rumors and unresolved questions, Francisca remained in pre-trial detention until her court proceedings began in October 2003. In the opening hearing, she reiterated that she had no recollection of killing her children, blaming the state of intoxication she was in that night. She said that upon finding them unresponsive, she had attempted mouth-to-mouth resuscitation. She described how her pajamas were soaked in sweat and removed them in panic. Once again, she blamed Pepe, claiming he had threatened and psychologically tormented her. She even denied having confessed the crime to police, saying she had been too intoxicated to remember anything clearly, even whether she had been alone in the house that night. She portrayed herself as a responsible mother and insisted that she no longer used drugs in prison, but confessed she was not mentally or emotionally fit to be released. During the trial, her eldest son, Jose Carlos, gave difficult testimony. He recalled waking up that night to the sound of his younger brothers shouting that they couldn't breathe. He didn't intervene. He assumed, tragically, that it was another episode of their mother's violence, a routine they had sadly grown used to. The prosecution laid out the evidence meticulously. They argued that Francisca had staged the crime scene to resemble a robbery and highlighted the forensic findings that proved she had been in control of her actions. The defense did not dispute the deaths, but insisted that drug use had rendered her incapable of understanding what she was doing. The prosecution dismantled this argument, presenting psychiatric evaluations stating that Francisca had been fully aware of her actions and the fatal consequences. The verdict was unanimous. Francisca Gonzalez, then 37, was found guilty of the double murder. The jury concluded that she had planned the crime in advance and that her use of drugs and alcohol did not impair her judgment. Psychiatric experts testified that she did not suffer from any psychological disorders that would absolve her of responsibility. She was sentenced to 2 consecutive 20-year prison terms, 40 years total. The court also ordered her to pay €200,000 in compensation to Pepe and €40,000 to Jose Carlos. Francisca began her sentence at the Sangonera prison in Murcia. Her cold demeanor and lack of visible emotion left a chilling impression. Initially met with hostility, She eventually earned a degree of respect from fellow inmates for her discipline and literacy. She offered to write legal documents for other prisoners in exchange for money, turning her skills into a prison economy. Despite the sentence, Francisca maintained her physical appearance. She was always well kept, polished, and meticulous about hygiene. She divorced Pepe shortly after sentencing and reportedly entered into relationships with at least 3 men, also incarcerated. Over the years, she was transferred between different facilities, but continued to be described as a model inmate. In 2016, she was granted a temporary weekend release. Then, in July 2020, nearly 17 years after her conviction, Francisca was granted a form of semi-freedom that allowed her to serve the remainder of her sentence outside prison under supervision. But freedom didn't last. In April 2022, authorities revoked her status after discovering she had not been staying at the residence she provided. She was sent back to prison. Later, it emerged that she had also violated release terms by consuming drugs. Though some privileges were later reinstated, for a time she was again barred from any temporary leave. Jose Carlos continued living in the same house where the murders occurred. By 2022, he had a family of his own, his wife and 2 children living in the very home where he lost his siblings. The property had once been offered for sale, but no one wanted to buy it, even at a fraction of its value. It remained in the family. As for Pepe, he reportedly left Spain for a time after the tragedy, but eventually returned. He has kept a low profile. Francisca remains incarcerated. Rumors circulated that she had married her defense attorney, but these were denied. Her story remains one of the most disturbing family crimes in Spanish history, not only for the brutality of the act, but also for her cold rationalizations, shifting narratives, and disturbing composure. For many, it is incomprehensible that a mother could plan and carry out such a crime. Whether it was revenge, desperation, or delusion, only Francisca knows the real motive. And whether she truly doesn't remember or simply chooses not to, remains a question that will likely never be answered.
Rico Omar Harris. Rico Omar Harris was an outgoing, athletic, and once awardly world-renowned basketball prodigy was went by simply Rico to the basketball community and those who followed his career. All those who knew him, from Los Angeles college basketball fans to the Harlem Globetrotters, were left searching for answers in a deluge of evidence that left us all in disbelief. His dynamic and entertaining skill set, brave battle against addiction, and apparent recovery were cut short by an unexplainable, untraceable disappearance in February. This left us all hoping to provide more substantial reasoning based on observable evidence and situational analysis. This explores the mystery of Rico Harris's disappearance in Yolo County and the hills around Cache Creek. Henry Harris and Margaret Fernandez welcomed Rico Harris into the world on May 19, 1977, in Los Angeles, California. The Harris family immediately grew close to one another after briefly relocating to Oregon to accommodate Henry's new career, but they soon returned to Los Angeles to raise 3 more children. The Harris brothers experienced violent and abusive tendencies from their father when they were youngsters. In particular, Rico was frequently the object of Henry's wrath, bearing the brunt of his insults even as he matured into a teenager who yearned for his praise. Margaret finally lost patience with Henry's collision course and moved to Alhambra, California with her kids. The oldest brother, Rico, took it upon himself to provide for the family, and he took care of his siblings while Margaret worked a full-time job. Rico chose to pursue acting at the age of 15, despite his parents' advice that he employ his large stature in sports. He made the difficult decision to drive all the way from Alhambra to Hollywood High School in order to increase his prospects of success. Rico, however, only realizes after a year that he was meant to be a basketball player, and he uses his father's address to enroll in Temple City High School. Rico was an enormous young guy, standing 6 feet 8 inches tall and weighing a pound 250 when he was 16 years old. He quickly established himself as the dominant player on the basketball floor, overwhelming his opponents and thrilling the spectators with his fast-paced performance. Inspired by Magic Johnson, he turned a once-dormant high school club into a formidable program that attracted college scouts as he exploited double-team defenses. He was an introspective teenager with little academic ability off the court until he found a girlfriend whose family encouraged him to get better grades. Rico was able to achieve even more success in basketball as a result. In his final year, he averaged 28 points and 15 rebounds, and he was compared to some of the best recruits in the Western United States like Paul Pierce and Jason Terry. Rico regrettably lost out on scholarship offers from prestigious colleges like UCLA since he didn't score well on the SAT. Rico had to enroll in school at Arizona State in order to be eligible to play basketball again. Rico struggled in his schoolwork and social life since he was away from his close-knit family and friends for the first time in his life. Along with 2 other teammates, Rico was temporarily charged with unlawful imprisonment in March 1996. However, the charges were then dropped, and Rico was informed that he would need to sit out a second year of sports in order to clean up his act. Rico transferred to Los Angeles City College because he could not bear to lose any more valuable time. He was able to sign on with the basketball squad and make himself known right away. While still playing at a high level on the basketball court, Rico led the LACC clubs to a state championship and was named Most Valuable Player. However, by his sophomore year, he was falling behind psychological growth, and he filed for the NBA draft when he broke up with his previous fiancée and realized his mental health was failing. Again, though, this plan was doomed to fail as Rico continued to put off important occasions to display his abilities in order to be near to home. Consequently, he declined multiple East Coast offers to play Division I college war, withdrew his name from draft consideration, and transferred to Cal State Northridge. Many people believed it was a bad decision for Rico's future professional life, and sadly, they were right. Rico tried to make amends with his father Henry during the summer break between semesters, but he was quickly turned down. Rico's lone bad season at CS Northridge was spent in a purgatory of social and emotional neglect, where he lost interest in the NBA and continued to lose focus. Rico turned to semi-professional basketball as soon as he was eligible for college in order to pursue his NBA goal. Before choosing to sign with the hilarious demonstration basketball team, the Harlem Globetrotters, he played for pickup teams in San Diego, St. Louis, and other places. Just 1 month into the Globetrotters gig, Rico tragically found himself in a brawl in South LA, where he was struck in the back of the head by a baseball bat. Baseball player was effectively ended by headaches and balance problems. Rico battled alcoholism for 7 years before spiraling out of control and turning to heroin, meth, and cocaine after returning to Alhambra with his mother and siblings. Actually, Margaret Harris, the siblings' mother, did everything in her power to support them while they battled their demons of substance misuse. All of the Harris siblings suffered from some form of addiction. Rico attended treatment after turning 30 years old in February 2007 in an attempt to get relayed. Although the program took longer than expected, Rico was able to overcome his addiction in the end. He got into a love connection with Jennifer Song, a Seattle insurance broker, in February 2012. Over the course of the following few years, Rico and Jennifer grew close. After a while, Rico made a permanent relocation to Seattle and began preparing for a married life with Jennifer. The two discussed starting a family and creating a bright future. Rico even managed to set up an interview for a position as a property appraiser. A remarkable chance in light of everything he had to overcome. But Rico had to return to Alhambra once more in order to achieve closure with his family before he could complete the metamorphosis. If you're fascinated by true crime and enjoying the video so far, make sure to hit that subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up to stay updated on all our latest content. On October 9, 2014, he had supper with his brother, and gave him a brand new smartphone. Rico then went to see his mother and had a private one-on-one chat. It's unclear what came of the exchange, but it's thought to have gone against Rico's intentions. Just after midnight, Rico left again for Seattle, making his last stop at Lodi, California. That was the last time anyone saw Rico Harris before he vanished into the North Sacramento wilderness. Early in September 2014, Rico and Jennifer, his girlfriend, enjoy a close, hopeful relationship and start discussing their future together. But Jennifer senses that something is wrong with Rico because he acts strangely and becomes disorganized. Rico admits he stopped drinking during the February after she keeps asking him questions. Jennifer felt unbalanced by the reversion to an old behavior, even though it hadn't become a habit yet. David Lara, a long-standing buddy who had renewed their acquaintance at the same time, confirms Rico's relapse. Despite their prior disagreement, Rico and Jennifer decided to move in together in Seattle, Washington, later in September to further their love. For Rico, who has previously struggled while separated from his close-knit family and city of Los Angeles, it is considered a huge undertaking. The pair had deep talks about getting married, starting a family, and discovering genuine love, but Rico is still uneasy in his new environment. Rico takes nearly a month to unpack because he felt uneasy settling into a place that wasn't his own. Jennifer claims that rather than lingering doubts or laziness, Rico's sensitive underlying will to support loved ones was what fueled the insecurity. Things start to improve in the October. Rico has an interview with a nearby real estate company to work as a property assessor. Rico ultimately unpacks his possessions in Jennifer's home, a statement that he's ready for change and that he intends to stay in Seattle since the new opportunity brings him happiness and encouragement. On October 8, 2014, the happy mood abruptly changed when Rico told Jennifer that he was going to explore later in the day. This was unusual for Rico, but Jennifer didn't really think twice about it and said goodbye to her fiancé. Later that October 8th, when Jennifer called Rico, Rico told her that he was leaving for a visit with his family in Los Angeles. Rico explains that he wants to put his troubled childhood past behind him and rebuild his relationship and future with his mother. Though shocked, Jennifer accepts his hasty decision and understands his intentions. Jennifer recalls Rico appearing to be in the right frame of mind and sounded eager to move on. On October 9th, Rico arrives at Alhambra the following day. Margaret, his mother, saw his confidence about his flourishing life and his joy about the recent changes. Margaret believes Rico may have been under the influence of drugs or alcohol, though. On October 9th, Rico enjoys dinner with one of his younger brothers. After leaving his mother's house in the evening, he gets his brother a new phone, and the two share old memories. Rico returns to Margaret's home in Alhambra following the brothers' rekindling in order to have a private discussion and once more find the closure he longs for from a broken-up upbringing. The talk ends quickly, and Margaret says afterwards that she didn't feel Rico gained the emotional disclosure he had hoped for from it. Soon after Friday, October 10th, around midnight, Rico made the decision to return to Seattle instead of staying the night as his mother had anticipated, so he might have more time to prepare for his interview. He leaves his mother's house with a few additional personal items in tow. About 1 o'clock, Rico gives his mother another call to apologize for his hasty choice. Margaret remembers his kid saying something like, "I have things I need to get done." Rico contacts Jennifer immediately after speaking with his mother, shocking her once more with his early return home. After 3 or 4 hours of conversation, Jennifer suggests that Rico find a motel and get some rest because he has been awake for more than 40 hours. When Rico does turn around, he expresses the wish to take a little nap by driving up to the neighboring mountains. Jennifer offers an alternate route, telling him that the dark, winding roads would be hazardous in the middle of the night and that he wouldn't have mobile coverage at high altitude. When the two hang up, Rico is still determined to drive. After sleeping for a few hours on October 10th, Jennifer gives Rico another call. Rico tells her he's stopping at a petrol station in the Californian town of Lodi, which is close to Sacramento. On the other end of the phone, he sounds quite exhausted. About an hour later, Rico receives another call. This time, it's his mother inquiring about his well-being. Rico acknowledges his tiredness at last and says he will find a place to eat and relax. Jennifer and Margaret both contact Rico several times during the morning to inquire about his intentions for rest, but Rico never answers. Following several fruitless attempts, Jennifer texts him, 10:44 a.m. When Rico does text Jennifer at last, he claims he's doing well but doesn't go into much information. This concludes anyone's formal correspondence with Rico Harris. Jennifer attempts to give Rico some undisturbed downtime as the morning turns into the afternoon, but her nervousness overcomes her, and she phones him anyhow, still receiving no answer. Jennifer convinces herself that he must still be in the Californian mountains and that the phone service issue is to blame. Jennifer officially succumbs to Rico's quiet between 7 and 8 p.m. and phones Margaret with concern. Margaret, on the other hand, appears composed and surmises that Rico is simply acting independently, which is consistent with his nature. Rico appears to be singing inadvertently when he catches himself singing along to music in his parked automobile sometime before midnight. He also flings several CDs from the passenger side around. Later on, it is discovered that these videotapes have a timestamp from the evening of October 10th, proving he was still alive and able to operate at that point. Rico's phone shuts off at 11:15. It's unclear if Rico did it on purpose or if the battery died. Jennifer and Margaret wait to report it even if Rico doesn't return calls or travels back to Seattle on the weekend of October 12, recalling that he once vanished for a few hours without anyone knowing and that it took him a few days to return. A Yolo County deputy sheriff conducts a routine search of a remote rest stop parking lot at Rumsey Canyon, located along California State Route 16 in Rumsey, California on Monday, October 13th. He spots a black Nissan Maxima parked in the dirt lot over to the side, but he doesn't stop it. When the Yolo County Sheriff goes back to his route on Tuesday, October 14th, the following day, he discovers the Nissan in the same location in the parking lot. After running the plate through his database, he finds that Rico Harris, whose address in Alhambra is still connected, is the owner. When Margaret receives a call from the Yolo County Sheriff's office informing her that the automobile has been located, but no one is there, she phones Jennifer in an attempt to interpret what both ladies have described as a bizarre dream. Margaret formally reports someone missing to the Alhambra Police Department, and a criminal inquiry is launched. Police organized a massive network of searches and rescue workers over the course of the following week or so. Overlooking the surrounding areas are helicopters equipped with demography cameras. For the hilly search area, all-terrain vehicles are commissioned, and cadaver dogs are sent out to detect any residual traces of Rico. The team searched a 27-mile stretch of Rumsey Canyon along Route 16 and a 5-mile radius around the parking spot overall, but they found few hints other than mysterious tracks in the dirt beside the road. Police used cell phone data to speak with neighbors and get some comforting reports of sightings from Sunday, October 12th, but nothing solid comes to light. Again, shoe tracks in the soil are discovered when investigators receive a tip on October 19th regarding the sighting of a huge guy going along Route 16. But when authorities linked the footprints and earlier eyewitness accounts to the October 19th evidence, they came to the conclusion that Rico had, for reasons that were unclear, left his car near Rumsey Canyon, strolled along Cache Creek, and then returned to the original position. The strongest basis for subsequent theories would come from this discovery. On October 22nd, a few days later, the search is scaled back and gradually reduced. Midway through November 2014, divers went back to the nearby bodies of water to document additional searches, but they once more turned up nothing suspicious or useful. Since the mystery of mid-October, no one has discovered reliable evidence that could direct law enforcement to solutions or inspire plausible theories apart from conjecture. As of right now, all that remains of our investigation is what we discovered during those few weeks of work, leaving the entire process muddled and full of unanswered questions. The majority of the concrete clues in Rico Harris's disappearance were found during the first week or two of searches, but none were more puzzling than the rucksack and cell phone found on a railing near Cache Creek on Route 16. Following the examination of cell phone records obtained from the provider business, data pings directed investigators to the Redwood Valley region of Northern California, approximately 70 miles northwest of the original location of Rico's vehicle. Authorities left notes on voicemails requesting tips from as many residents in the nearby villages as they could in an attempt to cover all the bases. The plan began to bear fruit quickly after lead investigator Dean Nyland got a call from a man in Redwood Valley who said he had discovered objects that belonged to Rico. After responding to the tip right away, police discovered that the Redwood man did, in fact, possess Rico Harris's black book bag. He had his cell phone and jumper wires inside the backpack. The guy described how, while traveling along Route 16, he, his wife, and their grandson noticed a stray rucksack on the highway's curb, which seemed remarkably out of place given the surroundings. The young boy informed his grandparents of this. The three yelled into the woods in the hopes of getting in touch with the owner of the bag as soon as the man stopped. Checking the bag for identification, the Redwood family discovered that nobody was at the creek. They brought the phone with them in the hopes of charging it and making touch with someone, as all they could find was the wires. Authorities believed the rucksack to be Rico's right away. Jennifer, who saw the package right away, said the bag looked like a purse. It was also discovered within 1,500 feet from a sighting that a bystander had reported earlier in the week. Someone who had observed a big African-American man on Route 16 standing next to the guardrail. When the officers examined the cell phone and went through its contents, these suspicions were validated. Extracted from the phone would subsequently turn out to be vital visual proof in building the chronology of Rico's last known activities. Rico had films on his media gallery showing him singing along to songs in his car, but he didn't seem to realize he was taking his own picture. Rico was observed stowing CDs throughout the cabin, tearing up random papers, and fiddling with the sunroof controls in addition to his careless singing. These videos were recorded in the late evening on October 10th, which indicates that Rico was present. This suggests that Rico provided evidence for the vehicle's dead battery and low petrol supply. When authorities hauled the car into the station, it looked like it had been looted, which was partially explained by the fact that Rico had been kicking around stuff in the car. Above all, though, the mobile phone recordings provided officials with a clearer picture of Rico's mental state at the time of his last communication with his family. Rico's latest drug relapse was believed to be caused by alcohol consumption during his stay at Alhambra. A weak mind would undoubtedly result from spending a significant amount of time awake for almost 50 hours in a row and having emotionally taxing interactions with his family. Rico may have been driven insane or extremely tired as a result of this. His erratic behavior and his history of personal hardships. The mobile phone, backpack, and overall significant case point definitely indicate that Rico was in trouble, if not from a third party, then at least from his own damaged and bruised self. In the Rico Harris case, the first and most widely discussed notion evolved into a convoluted, speculative tale of foul play. The Yolo County Sheriff's Department came up with the theory after discovering the Nissan abandoned and seemed to have been looted. Investigators discovered Rico's wallet, still full of items saved for a Discovery credit card, was left behind in addition to the disarray of documents, CDs, and bottles in the back seat. The automobile had a dead battery and no gas, and it wasn't parked in any of the designated spots outside. Police determined that Rico made a mistake and traveled northeast on Route 16 after stopping for gas in Lodi, California. He stopped to relax at Cache Creek Park in Rumsey Canyon, let off steam, and eventually arrived in Baton with a third party. Investigators surmised that the gas had probably been siphoned in order to explain the car's problems. Beyond a few possible sightings, this explanation would also explain how a 6'8" and 300-pound man could fall through the cracks so effortlessly. That kind of man usually doesn't disappear unnoticed unless someone else helps them, drives them away, or does something really evil. The cell phone recordings show Rico sitting in an inactive car on October 10th, which further clouded the foul play theories when his backpack and footprints were found. It's probable that he juiced the batteries from prolonged use of the engine and the audio system, running out of gas. Rico may have allowed his car to run through the night of October 10th and into the weekend of October, as average cars may use 1.5 gallons of petrol per hour only in idle mode. It would also assist to explain why jumper cables were in Rico's hands and why the car's interior was a complete disaster. The tracks along Route 16 suggested that Rico traveled along the highway to flag down people, which suggests that he was likely looking for someone to help jump his battery. Additionally, there were no DNA results to support the presence of a stranger or third-party interference. Therefore, investigators theorized that Rico had problems after hitchhiking along Route 16, even though he most definitely did not face foul play while in his automobile at Cache Creek. They think Rico was taken advantage of by someone or someone with criminal intent while he was strolling and chatting to anyone who would stop to help him. Rico was probably not in the best of moods that weekend, and if he appeared worn out or disoriented, his abductor might easily convince him to leave his backpack inside and get into the car. Why anyone would take the chance of interacting with a man who is virtually certain to have a physical advantage, not to mention carry no cash, is a little puzzling. It's important to keep in mind, though, that Rico relapsed not long before going missing. How likely would he have been convinced to take cocaine or other substances if someone had offered them to him? This person may be anyone, a possible assassin, a drug dealer, or someone who is desperate for a man of Rico's caliber. Sadly, other from sifting through locals with criminal histories, there are very few connections or links connected to the foul play scenario. Given the size of Northern California and the Sacramento region, there are almost endless possibilities. Many people also believe that Rico was attacked and captured by a huge predator or wild animal. There is a good variety of wildlife in Northern California, including ferocious animals like black bears, mountain lions, and rattlesnakes. Of course, a rattlesnake may bite and poison an unwary human. But if Rico had really been bitten, his body would have been discovered by multiple search parties or by helicopters hovering overhead. Despite their intimidating appearance, black bears are actually fairly kind and rarely engage with people, much less a big man the size of Rico. The mountain lion is the only species that makes sense, but it would take a very powerful cougar or pack of cougars to kill Rico and then carry his body into a habitat or habitation cave that is off limits to people. In the arid stretch of Rumsey Canyon, the search revealed no blood or evidence of struggle. And once more, Rico's sheer size likely discouraged wild animals from approaching. Furthermore, given the time frame of his disappearance and the ongoing manhunt, if he did pass away in the wilderness, his body wouldn't have to bury itself beneath the surface and remain hidden. The final theory surrounding Rico centered on a staged disappearance and planned getaway. This plot highlights Rico's past indecisiveness and likely disappointment with the closure he was hoping to find upon his return to the Alhambra. The story's proponents contend that Rico decided it would be best to disappear without a trace and flee to a new location after realizing he no longer liked the life he had dreamed for in Seattle. According to the notion, Rico might have purchased a second phone to use for his escape, and his brother may have assisted him along the way. Rico also purchased a new cell phone for his brother. Rico chose to sneak out, citing his booked interview as justification, as his mother's talk became sour. Rico gradually cut up communication with his mother and girlfriend while traveling to Sacramento. He also took a diversion from Interstate 5 to Seattle and headed east to Cache Creek. He recorded himself acting agitated upon his arrival, possibly even staging a kidnapping or robbery. Rico left the car with his old phone and rucksack once the gas and electricity eventually ran out, looking as though he needed assistance with the jumper wires. Rico chose to create a distraction by leaving the backpack and phone behind as he flagged down a car to hitchhike. Some even claimed that the person who picked him up knew about his scheme and had a connection to both Rico's fake absence and his new life. Ultimately, there are a lot of contradictions in this notion. Rico had insisted to everyone he knew about how encouraging the chances were in Seattle. He had recently moved to Washington State, was in regular communication with Jennifer about getting married and starting a family, and had really settled in the missing Discovery credit card that was discovered missing from Rico's wallet, was also tracked by the police. The account was never assessed or used after October 10th, indicating that if Rico escaped, the money he would almost certainly need to carry out such a scheme came from sources other than his own money. Considering the dexterity and inventiveness required to accomplish such a feat, the likelihood that Rico would not have staged the mental breakdown seen in the selfie films, and the coincidental difference in Rico's recent outlook on life, it is very unlikely that Rico would stay at his presentation and then flee. Prior to disclosing our theory regarding Rico's enigmatic disappearance, we would like to clarify that the conclusions we reached are entirely conjectural and grounded in factual subtext, evidence, and circumstances. We only have access to the same information that is shown in each video, and we just watch, investigate, and report, not attempting to make any firm or expert guarantees regarding the conclusions we draw at the end. In this instance, we think Rico kept abusing drugs due to intense psychological suffering and extreme fatigue. He also may have gotten lost on his way and ended up alone and unobserved in the wilderness, where he most likely perished while being concealed by the elements. Rico coped well throughout his life without having a loving, nurturing father. Rico internalized his passion of basketball and sought his father's praise despite the verbal and physical violence he experienced as a child. Rico never really distanced himself from Henry Harris, even after he and his siblings moved in with their mother. Rico exacerbated the simmering stress from a difficult upbringing when his basketball career faded and he turned to drugs and alcohol. Rico encountered his own father in jail following an arrest for public intoxication, further complicating the situation. Rico suffered psychologically from these humiliations and unresolved tensions. After he vanished, Jennifer discovered evidence of untreated melancholy, anxiety, and potentially bipolar disorder. Given his past mental health issues, a return to substance abuse, family issues, or other setbacks would have left Rico feeling hopeless on his drive back to Seattle. His heart and mind were permanently damaged when his attempts to make sense of his history failed and he was left with deep scars. As a result, wrong turn on his way up north, which led him into the mountains of northern Sacramento and into Ramsey Canyon. Rico then found an outlet for drugs and alcohol and picked some up between stopping for petrol and Lodi and parking in the lower area of Cache Creek Park. Hard drugs are known to be widely available in Sacramento in the surrounding areas, so a former addict could probably find them and buy them without too much difficulty. Rico either took the medications and then collected them or felt the full power of the negative effects after he parked. It's possible that he used methamphetamines or crack during the trip in any case. These stimulants would account for his extended periods of wakefulness. The Nissan Maxima's crucial hint, discovered after the car was towed into evidence by the police, provides the basis for the drug theory. Under the passenger seat, beneath the glove box, investigators found a bindle, a plastic wrap intended especially for drugs. Now, the bindle in question was empty and did not have any drug paraphernalia or residue in it, but it did suggest a recent tendency towards substance abuse. Additionally, 2 empty and half-full bottles of alcohol were discovered, both of which were assumed to have been consumed by Rico. Rico left the lower location and strolled along the highway guardrail after the car ran out of petrol and electricity. After leaving his phone and rucksack on the curb, he strolled over to the creek to cool off and get a drink. The search teams discovered his massive footprints there a few days later. Rico spent some time by the lake before discovering a quicker route up the hill to return to the road, a location that was distinct from the one where he'd left his possessions. Rico managed to hitchhike and find his way into a small town or place where he could freshen up and obtain food while he was still planning along Route 16. A pair of vagrants in Clear Lake, California claimed to have seen Rico purchasing drugs in the region once, but they provided no other information or specifics to support their claims. This theory's final section is a bit hazy. It's entirely unclear with whom Rico interacts during the course of the following week, but he stays out of the spotlight and goes back to Ramsey Canyon's lower side, where his car was parked on October 19th. This evening, there was a report of a large African-American male being seen traveling in that direction. Additional footprints in the vicinity by the police corroborated the allegation. Rico was most likely dumped off so he could get back to his car, but when he saw it had been taken away, he either chose to stay in his newfound freedom and march into the woods, or he went back to the original automobile. The real enigma lies in what transpired after. Rico was noticeable, as was already said, and his profile made it difficult to blend in. Perhaps he fell into a valley or sinkhole that hid him from searchers. Perhaps he committed suicide in a remote area of the untamed trees. Whatever the specifics, Rico Harris was struggling with problems that none of us can comprehend or overlook. Whether it was anxiety and drug usage combined with sleep deprivation, a melancholy episode brought on by previous events, or something else entirely, Rico wasn't acting normally. His careless actions in the cell phone films demonstrate this, as well as regrettably casting a dark cloud on which has tarnished Rico's reputation and clouded the public's view of the case. It is important to clarify that Rico was a kind and considerate person despite his drug abuse. He is not any more of a bad guy than you or I, and he deserves the same amount of attention as any other missing person. The stigma of addiction will be damned. Addiction is a mental and physical illness that can negatively impact one's emotional and physical well-being. Addicts fight not just against their illness, but also against the ongoing denigration of society and those who view addicts as failures due to their behavior. Rico Harris sought to be located. He was a brave man who bravely faced great suffering all of his life. After a perilous night, he at last saw the light at the end of the tunnel when dawn broke. He cherished his relationships with friends and family as well as changing people's lives. Rico had athletic talent, but he also had compassion. It only seems fitting that we return the favor in his honor, since he would have gone to unimaginable lengths to assist people in need. Let him not be remembered as a drug addict, missing person, or as a Harlem Globetrotter. Let his ultimate goal be to be a foster father and carer, a fighter, and a found father. Thanks for watching. The death of a young person is never easy. We say things like, their life was cut short and they had so much more to offer the world. For Martha Moxley, those things were indeed true and more. Martha never got the opportunity to grow up and change the world. Her legacy was ripped from her, taken by force by a selfish individual who felt entitled to her. Martha's name has become synonymous with violence, and her killer walks free, leaving her family to advocate for her justice. In the summer of 1974, Martha Moxley and her family moved to Greenwich, Connecticut. Their new home was in Bellhaven, an affluent, gated community in the heart of the state. The Moxley family had moved from California, where Martha and her brother John had been born and raised. Their father, John David, was a partner in a corporate accounting firm, and their mother Dorothy was a homemaker. Both were loving parents, and the family lived a seemingly charmed life. At school, both Martha and John excelled. Martha, in particular, was very popular. She made friends quickly and had an outgoing and vivacious personality. In the fall of 1975, Martha was a Western Junior High School sophomore. Martha got good grades in school. She was athletic, talented in various arts, with an affinity towards drawing and sketching, and had even been voted the most popular girl in school in her yearbook. Those who knew her said Martha was kind, confident, and easy to get along with. She was upbeat and friendly and was often surrounded by friends. Martha was also family-oriented. She didn't mind spending hours and hours with her family on trips or at home. However, like most teens, she wasn't perfect. Sometimes she would miss curfew, sneak a beer, or get caught smoking cigarettes. However, by and large, her parents noted she was a good kid and didn't have any concerns about her. They trusted her ability to make good decisions and felt she was responsible and level-headed. That summer, she made a new group of friends that she'd met at the Bellhaven Club within the gated community. With her new friends, they hung out at the pool and played tennis. According to her diary, it was there that she met a boy she was dating, but the relationship was very innocent. In the fall, Martha had just gotten her braces off, and she'd also tried out for the cheerleading team at her school. Her diary revealed her excitement for both of those events. Belhaven was a very secure, exclusive gated community. Anyone in and out was checked by security. Crime rarely occurred there, and it was assumed to be highly safe. All the neighbors knew each other, and all the kids seemed to get along. It was the kind of neighborhood where parents trusted other parents and felt that they had each other's backs. If kids were hanging out in the community, it was regarded as completely safe. No one could predict what would happen the last weekend of October. The likelihood that it was one of their own would tear the community apart. The night before Halloween, October 30th, was known as Mischief Night to the teens of Belhaven. That evening Martha was supposed to be grounded but begged her mother to let her go out with her friends, and Dorothy Moxley agreed and let her go. Mischief Night was supposed to consist of innocent pranks, phone calls, bell ringing, maybe even toilet paper in a couple of trees. Nothing serious, and nothing that would cause damage to others. Martha left that evening around 6 p.m. She was accompanied by a somewhat large group of kids from the neighborhood. She left the house with her friend Helen and was due to come home at her 10 p.m. curfew. Dorothy stayed up, waiting for Martha to come home, and once Martha's curfew had passed, she called over to Helen's house to check in and ask if Martha was still with her. Helen said Martha wasn't there. Martha was still at the neighbor's house, last seen with the Scudgel boys, 17-year-old Tom Scudgel and his younger brother, 15-year-old Michael Scudgel. After the call with Helen, Dorothy was sure she would see Martha crossing the street to come home. As the hours passed, she eventually fell asleep sitting beside the window, waiting. The following morning, Dorothy checked Martha's bedroom and noticed the bed had yet to be slept in. She raced around the house, and when she couldn't locate Martha, she called the police. She knew right then that something was deeply wrong. The police, however, weren't initially concerned. They reassured Dorothy that missing teens usually turn up at a friend's house. But Dorothy knew Martha and something wasn't right. She and her son John decided to go door to door to ask neighbors if they knew where she was. The first place she went was over to the Skakel house. The father, Rushton Skakel, was a widower with 7 children. Ruston was the brother of Ethel Kennedy, wife of John F. Kennedy. Tom Skakel answered the door and told Dorothy he had not seen Martha since the night before, and neither had his brother. Dorothy continued knocking on doors and calling friends to no avail. Soon the entire neighborhood would be out looking and calling out for Martha Moxley. A classmate of Martha's made the horrific discovery while cutting through the Moxley property. Was the body of 15-year-old Martha Moxley. Martha lay face down in a pool of her own blood. Her head had been bludgeoned with a golf club, and she'd been stabbed in the neck. The golf club was mostly recovered, having been shattered into 4 pieces. However, the handle was missing. It was revealed that Martha's jeans, underwear, had been pulled down to her knees, but officials have stated that she wasn't sexually assaulted. Detectives speculated that Martha had been attacked only 200 feet from her front door. The first blow appeared to have been to her jaw, signifying she had faced her attacker, but evidence showed she'd been taken by surprise. She didn't have many defensive injuries, and the initial blow to her face had likely rendered her unconscious. There were drag marks from the initial attack site to under the tree where her body was found. The golf club was then likely broken into pieces, and a sharp portion of the shaft was used to stab Martha to death. No one heard or recalled hearing any screaming, but several neighbors reported their dogs barking from 9:45 till about 9:15 p.m. Trees on the property shielded Martha's attack from the view of Dorothy and other neighbors who could have witnessed it. There had only been one street lamp nearby, and it likely would have been quite dark. The discovery of Martha's body sent shockwaves through the community. Police were called to the scene, and they uncovered a bizarre clue during their initial investigation. The golf club used to bludgeon Martha belonged to the Skakel family, matching a set found there. The media went into a frenzy once the Skakels became involved in the investigation. Though the Skakels didn't share the name, the Kennedy connection drew wild media attention. In addition to the family being wealthy, well-connected, all in their own right, Rushton was the heir to a coal empire. Detectives put together a timeline of Martha's last few hours. Based on reports from friends, Martha arrived at the Scudgel home with her friends Helen and Jeffrey at 8:45 p.m. Michael Scudgel was the one who opened the door, and the 4 hung out for a while before Tommy arrived. Then the 5 hung out until 9:30 p.m. when 2 other Scudgel boys invited the group to a cousin's home nearby. That is when the group starts to disband. But she declines. Jeffrey walked Hell at home, and Martha stayed at the Skakel house with Tommy. investigators determined Martha had been attacked between 9:45 and 10 p.m., and both brothers had solid alibis. Tommy, who was the last person seen with Martha, told police he said goodbye to her around 9:30 p.m., and then he went inside to complete a school assignment, and then watched a television program with their live-in tutor. Similarly, Michael told investigators he was away from home between 9:15 p.m. and 11 p.m. at his cousin's house, and his story was corroborated by his cousins. In Martha's diaries, she revealed that both Skakel boys had been flirtatious with her at some point. She'd been practicing driving, and while in the car, Tommy had put his hand on her knee twice, which she had pushed away both times. She also said that Michael had been drunk and, quote, made an ass of himself. In her diaries, she doesn't appear to have reciprocated any romantic feelings for either boys. Still, that evening on October 30th, Hella remembers Martha and Tommy being playful and flirty with each other. Other friends revealed seeing Tommy and Martha go off behind a fence, and the two were later seen kissing around 9:30 p.m. Tommy became a prime suspect and was interviewed by detectives. Initially, detectives had been allowed to do a cursory search of the Skakel property. However, when it became clear that Tommy was being investigated as a suspect, Rushton stepped in with a small army of lawyers and stopped cooperating with law enforcement. After that, a warrant was never obtained and law enforcement never went back to the home. Rushton Skakel eventually hired private investigators to conduct their own investigation. Allegedly, this was to assess any potential risks to either of his sons. As both boys had alibis, Greenwich investigators were forced to look elsewhere to 23-year-old Kenneth Littleton, the Skagel family's live-in tutor. Those in the Skagel household claimed Kenneth was outside at 9:45 p.m. to investigate a noise and returned around 10:25 p.m. Investigators dug deeper into Kenneth but found no reason for him to want to harm Martha, as the two had never met. Littleton had worked at the Skakel residence for less than a month before the murder. However, he stated he'd seen disturbing behavior from the kids he was supposed to be a companion to. He said he learned quickly that Michael was already developing issues with alcohol. He said once he discovered a chipmunk that had been killed with a golf club and pinned to the lawn with golf tees pierced through its body. He said he approached Michael about the chipmunk and asked if he'd done it. According to Kenneth, Michael responded, quote, though it needs to be said that Kenneth Littleton isn't the most reliable witness. Year after Martha's murder, he was fired from his job and harbored a deep resentment towards Rushton Skakel. He'd been fired because the eldest Skakel's kids' grades had gone down, and he had a series of substance abuse issues. He was hospitalized after attempting suicide, and it would take him over a decade to get his life back together. Without any solid evidence, the case went cold until 1991, when the case was reignited. In '95, investigators discovered leaked documents from the private investigators that Rushton Skakel had hired. Documents revealed that Tommy and Michael had lied to Greenwich investigators during their initial interviews. Michael revealed to his father's private investigators that he'd not gone straight home at 11 p.m., and instead he went over to Martha's house, climbed a tree, and masturbated outside what he believed was Martha's bedroom window. According to Michael, he used to go around the neighborhood peeping into windows to, quote, jerk off. He said this was the first time he'd gone to Martha's house, and he hadn't initially realized the room he was at wasn't Martha's. It was her brother's. In the documents, it was also discovered Tom had last seen Martha